Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. Rain hammered against the windows, a relentless downpour that matched the turmoil brewing in my chest. Lucy had just stepped into the shower, her voice trailing off about some mundane detail of her day. I was in the kitchen, absently scrolling through emails on my phone, when I heard the faint buzz from the counter. It wasn't my phone, it was Lucy's, left behind as she rushed upstairs. Normally, I wouldn't have paid attention. Her work messages and social media notifications were none of my business. But this time, a message preview caught my eye, lighting up her screen like a flare in the night. Can't wait for this weekend. I'll make you forget all your worries. N. I froze. N, who was N? My mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation. A coworker? A friend I didn't know? But the tone of the message wasn't casual, it dripped with intimacy. My fingers hovered over the phone, hesitation locking me in place. For a brief moment, I considered leaving it alone, pretending I hadn't seen it. But curiosity, or perhaps self-preservation, overrode my restraint. I swiped up, unlocking her phone. She wasn't careful with passwords, we both knew each other's. It took only a few taps to reach her messages. There it was, a thread filled with texts from Neil. Not N, not some anonymous figure, Neil, the client who had been to our home, sitting at our table, joking with me over beers. The messages weren't innocent. They painted a vivid picture of clandestine meetings, hotel rooms, and moments stolen during client dinners. Every word was a dagger, cutting deeper into the trust one had taken for granted. My hands shook as I scrolled, disbelief giving way to rage. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was orchestrating an elaborate betrayal with someone who had looked me in the eye and called me his friend. The sound of running water upstairs broke the trance. Lucy would be out of the shower soon, and I had no idea how to face her. My mind churned through possibilities. Should I confront her now, let the anger boil over? Or should I wait, gather more evidence, and approach this calmly? I locked her phone and placed it back where I found it, my heart pounding as if I'd been caught. The rain outside seemed to echo the storm brewing within me. I paced the kitchen, forcing myself to think rationally. Acting on impulse could destroy any leverage I had. I needed to be strategic. When Lucy came downstairs, wrapped in a towel with damp hair cascading over her shoulders, she gave me a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that once lit up my world, the one I thought was reserved only for me. Now, it felt like a cruel facade. "Hey, Mark," she said, her voice casual. "What's for dinner?" The sheer normalcy of her tone made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but instead, I played along. Thinking pasta. Something quick. Sounds good. She disappeared into the bedroom to get dressed, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. Over dinner, I studied her closely, searching for cracks in her armor. She chatted about work, the kids, and weekend plans as if nothing had changed. But I saw it now, the occasional flicker of guilt in her eyes, the slight tension in her voice when she mentioned another client meeting next week. I nodded, smiled, and pretended everything was fine, even as my insides twisted. She didn't notice my quiet detachment, too absorbed in her performance. By the time the meal was over, I had made up my mind. This wasn't something I could ignore, but it wasn't something to confront blindly. I needed proof, leverage, and a plan. The first step came the next day while she was at work. I logged into our shared computer and checked her cloud storage. Lucy had always been meticulous about backing up her files, and sure enough, there were photos, selfies of her with Neil, smiling in places she had never mentioned visiting. There were screenshots of emails, itineraries for trips I thought were work-related, and even a receipt for a hotel I'd never heard of. Each discovery was a fresh wound, but it also solidified my resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Lucy had built an elaborate double life, and I was going to dismantle it piece by piece. By the end of the day, I had compiled everything, texts, photos, receipts, into a folder. It wasn't just evidence of her infidelity, it was a map of her deception, stretching back months, maybe years. I stared at the folder, a heavy weight pressing on my chest. This was the woman I had trusted, the mother of my children. And she had turned our life into a charade. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't bring myself to touch her. Her betrayal had poisoned even the simplest gestures of affection. When she fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with what to do next. Confrontation wasn't enough. I needed justice. The days that followed were a blur of quiet preparation and suppressed anger. Every moment spent in Lucy's presence was a test of endurance. Her laughter, her touch, her casual conversations, everything felt like a performance I couldn't bear to watch. But I knew I had to keep playing my role until I was ready to act. I started with practical steps. I met with a divorce attorney in a small office across town, tucked away in a strip mall where I wouldn't risk running into anyone we knew. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Melanie, listened intently as I laid out my story. She didn't flinch at the details. It was clear she'd heard worse. "You've got a solid case," she said, flipping through the evidence I had compiled. "The texts, photos, and receipts paint a pretty damning picture. But we need to be strategic about this. Do you want custody of the kids?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "They don't deserve to be caught up in this mess." Melanie nodded. "Good. Judges don't look kindly on infidelity, especially when there's proof of deception involving family time and finances. We'll file for full custody and make sure you get to keep the house. But before we proceed, let me ask you, do you want to confront her first, or do you want her served without warning?" That question haunted me as I drove home. Part of me craved the catharsis of confronting Lucy, of watching her squirm under the weight of her lies. But the other part, the part that wanted to ensure everything went according to plan, knew that blindsiding her with the divorce papers might be the better option. I wasn't just angry, I was determined to control the narrative. For now, I decided to wait. There was more groundwork to lay. The next step was more personal. I couldn't let Lucy's actions destroy my relationship with our kids. Emma and Daniel were 13 and 11, old enough to sense when something was wrong but too young to understand the complexities of infidelity and betrayal. I made a point of spending extra time with them, helping Emma with her science project, playing catch with Daniel in the backyard. I wanted them to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was there for them. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma asked one evening as we worked on her project. "You've been different lately." "Just busy, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "But I'm here, always." She seemed satisfied with that, but her question lingered in my mind. I couldn't let my anger and sadness seep into my parenting. They deserved better. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed Lucy growing more distant. Her late nights at work became more frequent, her excuses thinner. Once, she claimed she had a team meeting on a Saturday afternoon. I watched her leave the house in a dress that was far too glamorous for a corporate meeting, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. It took every ounce of restraint not to call her out right then. Instead, I waited until she was gone and checked her phone records. The same number, Neil's number, popped up repeatedly. I ran it through a reverse lookup service, confirming what I already knew. Then I dug deeper, finding a pattern in her calls and texts that lined up perfectly with her so-called work commitments. The final piece of the puzzle came one evening when Lucy left her laptop open. She had stepped away to take a phone call, her face lit up with a smile that no longer had anything to do with me. I glanced at the screen and saw an open calendar. There it was, a weekend trip marked "End meeting." My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I took a photo of the screen, adding it to my growing arsenal of evidence. The tipping point came a week later when Lucy dropped the bombshell. "I'm going to a client retreat next weekend," she said over dinner, her tone casual but her eyes carefully avoiding mine. "It's a last-minute thing, but it's important for the firm." I nodded, pretending to be indifferent. "Where's it at?" "Palm Springs," she said, her voice too smooth. "Just a small group, nothing fancy." "Sounds nice," I said, keeping my tone light. "You'll have to tell me all about it when you get back." She smiled, relieved that I wasn't pressing her for details. But in my mind, the plan was already forming. This retreat wasn't about clients or work. It was another rendezvous with Neil, and I intended to use it to my advantage. That Friday, Lucy left the house in the morning, her suitcase packed and her demeanor unusually cheerful. "I'll call you when I get there," she said, kissing me on the cheek. The gesture felt hollow, like a final insult. I watched her drive away, a strange mix of sadness and determination settling over me. As soon as she was gone, I sprang into action. I had already arranged for a private investigator to follow her. His job was to document everything, where she went, who she met, and how she spent her time. I didn't just want hearsay, I wanted irrefutable proof. While the investigator worked, I prepared for the fallout. I secured the house's finances, moving half of our joint savings into an account under my name. I updated the passwords on my personal accounts and changed the locks on the home office. Lucy wouldn't see any of it coming. That weekend was agonizing. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was the investigator with an update. Finally, on Sunday evening, the call came. "She's with him," he said simply. "Checked into a resort under an alias. I've got photos and video footage." "Send me everything," I said, my voice tight. "I'll take it from here." As I hung up, the weight of the truth settled over me. Lucy wasn't just betraying me, she was tearing apart the life we had built together. But now, I had the tools to confront her and take back control. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lucy returned late Sunday evening, stepping through the door with an air of exhaustion that felt as fake as her excuses. I was waiting for her in the kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, my laptop open on the counter. The moment she walked in, I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, but I forced it down. This wasn't the time to lose my cool. "Hey," she said, setting her suitcase down with a sigh. "Long weekend." "I'm beat." "Welcome back," I said, my tone even. "How was Palm Springs?" "Good," she replied, avoiding my gaze. "Busy, though. Barely had time to relax." I nodded, sipping my coffee. I figured. Work trips are always like that, aren't they? She paused, as if sensing something in my tone, but she quickly shook it off. "Yeah, exactly." I gestured to the dining table. "Sit down for a minute. We need to talk." Her expression shifted, a flicker of worry crossing her face before she smoothed it over with a smile. "What's up?" She sat, and I closed the laptop, folding my hands over it. "Lucy," I began, keeping my voice calm, "I know about you and Neil." Her reaction was immediate, her eyes widened, her cheeks flushed, and her hands clenched into fists on the table. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice a mix of indignation and panic. "Don't insult my intelligence," I said sharply, cutting through her denial. "I know about the texts, the phone calls, the trips. I know about Palm Springs, and I know about Neil." She opened her mouth to protest, but I reached for the folder I had prepared and slid it across the table. "Everything is in here," I said. "The texts, the photos, the hotel receipts. Don't even try to deny it." Lucy stared at the folder like it was a live grenade. Her hands trembled as she opened it, flipping through the damning evidence. Her face paled with each page, her facade crumbling with every word and image. "I can explain," she said finally, her voice shaky. No, I interrupted. You can't. There's no explanation that justifies what you've done. You lied to me, to our kids, to everyone who trusted you. And for what? A fling? A thrill? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Mark, I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was confused. I felt neglected. Neglected? I snapped, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You felt neglected, so instead of talking to me, you decided to have an affair. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I didn't want to hurt you, she choked out. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You've done exactly that. For a moment, the room was silent except for her muffled sobs. I let her cry, the weight of her guilt sinking in. Finally, she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, Mark, she whispered. Let's fix this. I'll end it with Neil. I'll do whatever it takes. Just, don't leave me. I stared at her, the woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years, now reduced to a desperate, pleading stranger. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of those years, the memories we had built together. But they were tainted now, shattered by her betrayal. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. You'll get the papers tomorrow. Her sobs turned into wails. No, Mark, please. Think about the kids. Think about everything we've built. I am thinking about the kids, I said, rising to my feet. They deserve better than a family built on lies. And as for what we've built, you destroyed that the moment you chose Neil over us. Lucy spent the next hour begging and pleading, throwing out every excuse and apology she could think of. But I didn't budge. When she finally realized I wasn't going to change my mind, her demeanor shifted. The tears dried up, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. So, that's it, she said, her voice icy. You're just going to throw it all away. No, Lucy, I replied. You did that. I'm just making sure we don't keep living in a lie. Her anger flared. You're being selfish. Do you think the kids will be better off in a broken home? Do you think you're some kind of hero for tearing this family apart? I'm not the one who broke our home, I shot back. And don't you dare use the kids as a shield. This is on you. She stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter as I tried to steady myself. The confrontation had taken everything out of me, but I knew it was just the beginning. The next morning, Lucy was subdued, her eyes red and puffy as she avoided me at breakfast. Emma and Daniel noticed the tension, their worried glances cutting deeper than any of Lucy's words. I forced myself to smile, to act normal for their sake, even as my world was crumbling. The divorce papers were served that afternoon. Lucy called me at work, her voice a mix of anger and despair. You really did it, she said. You actually filed. Yes, I replied simply. I told you I would. This isn't over, she spat. You think you're going to come out of this unscathed? You think the kids will forgive you for tearing our family apart? They'll understand, I said firmly. Maybe not now, but someday. And I'll be there for them every step of the way. Lucy hung up, and I sat back in my chair, the weight of the decision settling over me. It wasn't over, not yet. But I was ready to fight for the life I deserved, for the kids, and for my dignity. Lucy had made her choice, and now, it was my turn to make mine. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of paperwork, tension, and heartache. Lucy moved into the guest room while the divorce proceedings churned forward. We maintained a fragile truce for the sake of the kids, but every interaction felt like a sparring match beneath the surface. Emma and Daniel noticed the distance, but we kept our explanations vague. They were too young to understand the full truth, and I wasn't about to let them shoulder the burden of their mother's betrayal. One evening, as I was reviewing financial statements for the divorce, a notification popped up on my laptop, a message from the private investigator. Attached were additional photos and documents he'd uncovered, things I hadn't requested but that he thought I should see. I opened the folder with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. What I found left me frozen. There were photos of Lucy and Neil, yes, but there were also photos of another man, a man I didn't recognize. The timestamps on the images revealed that Lucy's affair with Neil wasn't the beginning of her infidelity. She had been seeing this other man, a stranger with a shaved head and piercing eyes, for nearly 2 years before Neil entered the picture. The investigators' report detailed lavish weekends, gifts, and even an apartment in the city that Lucy had kept secret. My stomach turned as I pieced it together. Neil wasn't just an affair partner, he was the rebound, the distraction Lucy turned to when her first double life started to collapse. I sat back in my chair, the betrayal expanding like a dark, endless chasm. All this time, I thought I knew the scope of her lies, but I had barely scratched the surface. I confronted Lucy the next morning. "You didn't just cheat with Neil," I said, throwing the new photos on the kitchen table. "Who's this guy?" Her face went pale, then flushed. "Mark, I can explain." "No," I snapped, cutting her off. "You've had plenty of chances to explain. Now you're going to tell me the truth." She hesitated, then slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "His name is Adam," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started a few years ago. We met at a conference. I didn't plan for it to happen, but it did," I finished for her, my voice dripping with contempt. "And then what?" "Neil was just the next in line." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. "I was unhappy, Mark," she said. "I didn't know how to fix things. I thought." "You thought what?" I interrupted. "That lying and sneaking around was the answer. That you could have your fun and I'd never find out." She didn't respond, and the silence between us was deafening. I stood there, staring at the woman I had once loved, now a stranger whose lies had unraveled everything we had built. The divorce moved forward, but I felt hollow. Even as I secured the house, full custody of the kids, and a clean financial break, the victories felt empty. The life I thought I knew had been an illusion, and the weight of that realization was crushing. The kids adjusted better than I expected. Emma threw herself into school, excelling in her classes, while Daniel joined a soccer league and made new friends. I focused on being there for them, but the nights were the hardest. When the house was quiet, and I was alone with my thoughts, the bitterness crept in. And then, the surprise. It started with an email, an anonymous message sent to my work account. The subject line read, "You deserve the truth." I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but curiosity got the better of me. The email contained a single sentence: Lucy wasn't the only one with secrets. Attached was a link to a private server. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. What I saw floored me. It was a video of Neil, Lucy's affair partner, sitting in a dimly lit room, looking disheveled and angry. He spoke directly to the camera. "Mark, you don't know me, but you deserve to know the truth about Lucy, and about your kids." My heart stopped as he continued. Neil claimed that during his time with Lucy, she had confided something to him, something devastating. Emma and Daniel might not be mine. She had admitted to Neil, during one of their illicit weekends, that her relationship with Adam overlapped with the conception of our children. She wasn't sure, Neil said, his voice cold. But she didn't want to risk losing you. So she kept quiet. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen in stunned silence. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and anger. Was this just a cruel attempt at revenge from Neil? Or was there truth to his words? I ordered DNA tests the next day, collecting samples from Emma and Daniel under the guise of a fun science experiment. The results came in 2 weeks later, and when I opened the envelope, my hands trembled. Emma was mine. Daniel wasn't. The revelation hit like a sledgehammer. My son, the boy I had coached in soccer, tucked in at night, and cheered for at school events, was not biologically mine. But in my heart, he was still my son. Nothing could change that. Lucy's betrayal, however, was now complete. I confronted her one final time, laying out the DNA results and the video from Neil. She broke down, admitting everything, but I felt nothing but contempt. "You didn't just cheat on me," I said. "You stole my right to know the truth about my own family. You don't deserve us." In the end, the divorce was finalized, and Lucy faded from our lives. She moved out of town, leaving me with full custody of both Emma and Daniel. I made a vow to never let her lies define us. Daniel and Emma were my kids, no matter what biology said, and I would do everything in my power to give them a stable, loving home. As for Lucy, I didn't look back. Her web of lies had been unraveled, and the truth, as devastating as it was, had set me free.